We're not saying climate change is coming, we're saying climate change is here.
New maps show what is likely to happen along Long Island's coastline in coming years.
The shape of Long Island is literally going to change tremendously.
That will make buying a home near the water more risky and more expensive.
Flood insurance the rate is going to be directly related to the risk of flooding.
And it's not just the rising tides, it's also the intense storms and flooding caused by torrential rain.
We had tables and chairs in the parking lot. Our kitchen equipment was spewed about.
Experts believe Long Islanders need to prepare themselves.
We have a lot of work to do to make a plan for how we're all going to continue to thrive on this island when it's a lot wetter and a lot smaller.
We're taking a close look at how Long Islanders are already paying the price for Long Island's stormy future in our special nextLI Town Hall event.
So welcome everyone to Newsday Studio 2 for this Newsday nextLI discussion. We've got a great panel here today. We appreciate you all being here with us, our audience, and those of you watching. Joining me now is a group of people who really have a wealth of knowledge about everything concerning climate change and how it's impacting all of us. We've got Dr. Chris Gobler from Stony Brook University School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences. Thank you, Dr. Gobler, for being here. Adrian Esposito, the Executive Director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Brookhaven Town Supervisor Dan Panico is here as well. And insurance industry expert Robert LaRocca with Sterling Risk Insurance. Thanks again for all of you for joining us for this discussion. We appreciate it. We want to get right into it. There's so much to discuss. We begin with an example of how storms and erosion are having an impact on people on the North Shore. So let's take a look at that.
Life is at stake here. My family is very, very scared to stay in this house.
Right outside Yan Chung's front door in Rocky Point, her dream house with a beautiful water view has become something she sees in her nightmares.
We are so stressful whenever we see that another rain is coming.
This massive hole opened up on Soundview Drive, and now Chung can't even drive to her home. Signs blocking both sides of where this road used to connect.
If my house is on fire now, the fire truck cannot reach me to save life. Even if I have emergency call, nobody could reach me to save us anymore.
It was a storm back in January that ultimately led to this portion of the roadway collapsing down the cliff, and it's gotten worse with every rainfall since, according to Chung. Now the cliff just 3 feet away from her retaining wall.
The whole community has deep concerns because this is not just affecting my house. There are houses around, and if nothing is done, it will just keep expanding.
Chung is pleading for help at every level of government, from the town to our local congressman, begging for the cliff to be restored or at least retained.
Clearly, there's a lot of things that the government could do immediately, at least to slow down the corrosion.
Until then, Chung waits and watches as the cliff inches closer by the day.
I think this is the best house I ever got. I was so lucky. So now I'm just hoping the cliff will be fixed ASAP.
It is a staggering image for sure. Yan Chung is here tonight. Are you over there? Is that you? Yan, hi Yan. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story with us too as part of this important issue. It is important to note here that Soundview Drive is a private road. We talked to the association. They said they were waiting for permits and permission from officials to begin work on it. But we want to start the discussion here with you, Robert, as our insurance expert here. Are you seeing more claims for things like this? I mean, what options do these homeowners have in a situation like that?
Well, it's a great question. And watching a video like this, obviously take it to heart being a Long Islander. Changing weather, it's happening. We're seeing more claims, more damage from flooding, from wind. The weather patterns are inconsistent. We're seeing it here on Long Island. We're seeing it nationally. So it continues to be a problem. From the insurance company side, they're watching it very carefully as well, because obviously, with the increased cost of construction and rebuilding, the cost of these claims are getting much bigger. And that's something that we're trying to watch. And post-COVID, the cost is increased exponentially. So at the end of the day, you have these storms, it's more costly to rebuild, and people just can't afford the premiums anymore.
Right. And we'll be discussing the increase in the premiums, but Supervisor Panico, Yan's home is in the town of Brookhaven in Rocky Point. She's reached out to the town. What can the government do to help someone in her position, specifically on the North Shore?
Well, much of the attention has been given, and rightfully so, to the South Shore after Sandy and Irene. But the North Shore has significant challenges, and in this case, as you correctly point out, it is a private road, a private association, and the future has now crept up. Even on the North Shore, we can be advocates for dealing with congressional offices, state approvals, town approvals, but ultimately these tough decisions about bluffs are not limited just to this residential community. The Port Jefferson Village is now determining whether or not they should move their clubhouse, whether or not to go forward with tennis courts anymore, and the cost, as Robert said, what is on the private side is exponentially more costly for government. And we have a tough time because all issues of government are issues of money. Dealing with what we have on public roads, it's a challenge.
So let's talk about saving, what we can. Adrienne, what options do we have to restore and retain the North Shore specifically?
I mean, we have options. Planning is our best tool right now. We have to, fight climate change on the large scale, but also on the community scale, we have to do things like ensure that our dune systems are intact. We have to replant seagrass beds. We have to make sure that we're using nature-based solutions so that the tides are controlled, such as wetlands restoration. There are things we can do to make sure that flooding, both the North Shore and the South Shore, is mitigated.
Right, so that was one example on the North Shore, certainly not the only place across Long Island dealing with these issues. Let's take a look at another example. This is on the South Shore from earlier this year. The South Shore, of course, dealing with erosion and these rising tides as well. So let's take a look at what they were experiencing earlier this year.
Major erosion at Tobay Beach in Massapequa as recent storms have ripped away the sand.
Normally, this stretch is 4 times the distance.
A dune seen here in this photo from March, wiped out just a week later.
It's just eroded this whole area. All the dunes that we planted beach grass on are gone. It's like a knife just cut everything away.
Joe Marinello of Massapequa grew up at Tobay and was a lifeguard here for years. Now this is where he brings his family and recently volunteered to plant dune grass, hoping to protect it. But now the entire thing has been washed out to sea.
The beach was up here, and it gave fortification or support for this huge concrete structure. Look at it today.
Each storm making the pavilion more vulnerable. Town officials say even Ocean Parkway is at risk.
The storms and the erosion are worsening every year.
The town has spent $4 million over the last 2 years trucking in sand and trying to rebuild the beach. They're currently asking state and federal officials for help.
We deserve answers, solutions from the Army Corps of Engineers, from our leaders in Washington, and we deserve help from the state of New York.
So if you've been to Tobay Beach recently, you know it certainly does not look like that. They committed to having it back open by Memorial Day, and they did. They brought in the sand, but the money to do that came out of taxpayer pockets. So we want to talk, and Tobay, of course, is just one example. So Dr. Gobler, we'd love for you to get into this for us. We know that this is not a new problem, this erosion on the South Shore. It's natural beach erosion, depending on the season. Explain that for us, and also, why is it that it's getting so much worse?
Well, there is certainly a seasonality. So, in the winter we get a lot of nor'easters. Those are powerful storms and certainly can play a big role in eroding beaches, but we've always had nor'easters. What's changing is climate change, and our oceans are getting warmer, the planet's getting warmer. 2023 was the warmest year ever on record. 2024 already we know will be in the top 5 warmest years. And when that happens, we've got sea level rise. So warmer temperatures, sea level expands. We've got melting of glaciers. We've already experienced since 1950 a 1-foot increase in sea level, and that's expected to continue. And so what's happening is that storms that were normal are now reaching much further up onto the ocean beaches, because it's a foot vertically, but that has a much bigger effect horizontally. So you can, you get one of these storms that used to be normal and maybe would make its way sort of up the beach, and then now with a foot of sea level rise, it's much more intense. And they showed Tobay Beach, but we had 3 storms, for example, in January that essentially took Montauk down to the stubs almost, right? You just saw the sandbags was all that was left out there. And they brought in a lot of sand. The Army Corps of Engineers came in after that and put in lots and lots of sand. But we know it's a matter of time until that gets taken away as well, because there's been that foot of sea level rise. This century, we're expecting 3 more feet of sea level rise, up to 3 feet. The interesting thing there is that that's dependent on what the planet does with regards to slowing fossil fuels, slowing the rise of CO2, and therefore slowing the rise of temperatures on the planet.
So as Long Islanders, we are, stuck between choosing kind of this fight or flight idea. Flight response would be getting out, the concept of managed retreats, which New York does have a buyout program for some homeowners. The fight response, on the other hand, being, these viable long-term solutions to protect Long Island. Adrienne, as far as the South Shore is concerned, is there anything different we can do to protect the South Shore?
There are things we can do. I just want to respond to one of the comments
Sure.
in the film is that, they're waiting for the Army Corps of Engineer and the federal government to help. And I think if we're waiting for the Army Corps of Engineer to help us, we might be waiting a very long time. So that's probably not the best strategy. On the South Shore, there are some things, there are glimmers of hope. There are things like building living shorelines, like the Patchogue Village did, which means replacing old bulkheads that don't really hold back the sea with a natural shoreline made of native vegetations and gravel and stones that allow for the tide to come and go, but it also helps absorb the tide, break the wave action, and protect the mainland. We can rebuild our wetlands. Those are critical frontline defenses for us. Unfortunately, we've overdeveloped wetlands. We've filled them in some cases, but now we have to restore and rebuild them, because that will really protect our shorelines from wave action, rising sea levels, wind events, and the coming hurricane season. So there are natural solutions that we can do, but we need to start implementing them very quickly.
So we know the Army Corps of Engineers has been working on this huge project to fortify the South Shore.
Yes, but for a decade.
Right. I mean, the amount of money put into this is enormous in
Yes.
Suffolk County, from Fire Island to Montauk. Supervisor Panico, is Long Island getting the financial support it needs to keep up with what's happening?
Generally, no, because the enormity of the task is soon going to be realized, and hopefully a program like this will get to the economic unsustainability of the process and the approach that some people want to take. All of this comes from tax money, and whether it's the federal government, state government, local government, we all could use more money, but it's not sustainable. And I've represented Mastic Beach for 14 years. Every single town board meeting, we are picking up wetland parcels. We're working with the Army Corps on a 187-acre restoration, working with people like Dr. Allison Branca to really have education not only in the community, but a viable solution and good planning for the future. There won't be enough money. And I think leaders on Long Island need to tell people the truth. And I think you have a vacuum in many areas of leadership where people want to tell people what they want to hear to get reelected. But the fact of the matter is the system is going to collapse under its own weight, because we won't be able to maintain all of the systems, even if you had the money to put them in place. In the town of Brookhaven, we furnish and install bulkhead at almost $1,800 a linear foot. So when you talk to people in Mastic Beach who have almost 7 miles of unspoiled wetlands, which is beautiful, no one has the money, no one's going to get the permits. It's cheaper to buy up the property and accept the reality. And I'll tell you, I was elected, I'm in my 15th year in Brookhaven town government. People came to me when I was first elected and sort of in a jovial fashion said, Dan, I thought you were a Republican. When did you become a tree hugger? I would tell you now, 15 years later, those same people will tell you, Dan, you're right. And conservation and the preservation of open space has become something that is embraced by conservatives because they realize now when you have elected officials who go out there and back up what they say and show them the economic realities, they realize preserving the open space is better than the alternative.
Well, we'll get into the buyout program a little more later on, but we do have a reader's question to get to. Adrian, I think we'll address this one to you. It's from Scott in Huntington. Will the Army Corps and the town planning boards consider allowing higher seawall heights by residents? So residents hoping to kind of take things into their own hands at this point.
I think that remains to be seen. I really do. I don't think seawalls are the answer. A seawall, is going to protect maybe that home or that area, but it doesn't deflect the water so it goes back out to sea and goes away. It diverts the water goes around the seawall and floods the next community. So a seawall is not the answer. I served on the Suffolk County Planning Commission for 12 years, and time after time after time, and I want to back up and accent what the supervisor just said, municipalities would come in, developers would come in, and they continuously ignored the dangers of building on bluffs. There was a big development in Huntington. They wanted to cut into the bluffs. A boutique hotel on the river in East Southampton, put another hotel on the river in Patchogue. These things are going to flood. And so we haven't changed our perspective. We haven't changed putting ourselves in harm's way. And I agree 100%, elected officials have not been on the train to tell the public the truth. We can't develop the way we used to. That will protect us. A seawall is a flawed answer. Retreat is the right answer.
So let's get into that. Let's talk about the buyout program. Is that something that the town of Brookhaven might consider making mandatory? Maybe a home is damaged, saying you can't rebuild. Has there been any thought about that, or expanding the program?
Well, we actively look to buy up properties. We have another property we're just going to demolish on Atlantic Avenue in East Meriches, which is now just a swamp. And we want to be prospective. We don't want to be the people when people look back and say, as Adrian mentioned, who approved this? What were they thinking? It's it's easy to say yes to people. It's the easiest thing to do. But the hardest thing, but the right thing, is to say no at times and say, you know what? Here is why I don't agree with you, and here's why we have to go in a different direction. And on the case of a seawall, we can't forget the water is coming up through the ground through hydrostatic pressure. A seawall bulkhead is going to do nothing for you. Many people who never had regular flooding in their basements across the South Shore now deal with pumping out almost endlessly. So we're looking at our code. Not only are we going to continue to buy properties, we're looking at our code to see how much impervious structure or landscaping we're going to allow on pieces of property, because all of that water runs off onto town roadways. And we used to build at a 5-inch containment in our catch basins. We now mandate over 9 inches because that's the reality that we face. But we are going to continue to buy properties and expand the programs for so much as we have money to do it.
Okay. Let's get to another reader's question. This one is for you, Robert. It's a question for you from Judith of Manorville. She asks, why do those of us who no longer live in a flood area have to pay for those who do? Our regular homeowner insurance has increased substantially. Why can't insurance companies rate premiums based on just the claims individual homeowners have made?
So they're taking a lot of factors into place. One is they are looking at the individual house. Is your house protected properly? Is it elevated? And the age of the house. But they have to look at the geographic areas also, because insurance is the spread of risk. Mm-hmm. You're not just insuring one person's house or one individual. So they look at these factors, and I think a lot of times people don't understand that, and they see their costs going up, so they automatically assume I've done the right things, or I no longer live in a high hazard area. Why am I being penalized? The costs are going up for everybody, but the ones that are in those high hazard areas are going up a lot more.
Yeah. We'll get into that too, about how this is a nationwide issue.
Multiple houses on the same street.
Right.
One will pay more because of the age of the home, what you've done to protect it.
So with that in mind, I mean, is there a point when insurance companies just say, listen, we're not insuring you at all?
Yes, and that's already happened. There are certain insurers, have taken a moratorium on doing that right now. I mean, Travelers is no longer running on Long Island right now. They're taking a wait and see. but they're doing it for the right reasons. They're doing it, they want to make sure that they will have capacity going forward for other homes going forward. They're looking at new developments. What, can be done to prevent these large claims from happening, and all of a sudden, you're losing an entire community. They look at how much aggregation they have in certain places.
Right. So not just deciding, not to cover someone, but to drop people, something we've been seeing. Another issue there, certainly.
I have seen this
Do you know somebody?
firsthand.
Do you know
Yes,
somebody?
I know somebody close to me. It's me. I lived in a humble abode, 2-bedroom home, 1 bath, and we dutifully paid our homeowners insurance for over 12 years and received a letter in the mail abruptly that said, "You've been great, goodbye," from the insurance company. And then we had to scramble and find homeowners insurance, which, as it turned out, was not easy.
Yeah.
And that was all because if you live where I lived, south of Montauk Highway, across from a river. We didn't even have waterfront property. It was across from the river. We were no longer covered by the State Farm. It was State Farm insurance.
Right.
They're taking a look at, certain carriers will say we won't write within 500 feet of the water. Some are now saying we'll write within a mile or 2 miles of the water.
Wow.
And Long Island's a very narrow area, so you're seeing a
that's
mile
right.
on both sides. It's getting very, very thin.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's an issue affecting all of us, the higher insurance rates. But another issue we want to take a look at here is that people are dealing with who don't live on the North or South Shore, aren't even close to the shore at all. They're dealing with flooding from these intense rainstorms. Let's take a look at that.
We had tables and chairs in the parking lot. Our kitchen equipment was spewed about.
Ruvo Restaurant in Port Jefferson has suffered from major flood damage, not once, but twice. In 2018, during a storm, rain runoff came crashing in from the parking lot. And in 2021, another flood. Several feet of water destroyed everything in the restaurant.
Really disrupts business, disrupts our staff, our food, everything here.
Barone says rain that never used to cause a problem is now a huge concern. She believes the infrastructure just can't keep up with the frequency and intensity of the rain we're getting.
So it's a lot of pre-planning. We have protocols of sandbags and things like that we kind of have to make sure we have in place when we know the rains are coming. We're checking the tides or making sure if we're open during that time, what's our evacuation plan.
They've successfully rebuilt and reopened twice now, but Barone is concerned about whether or not they can survive it a third time.
If we get water in here, we have to close. My staff is out of a job. My guest parties have to cancel. So a lot of pre-planning goes into the idea that there could be another flood at any time. So it's tough.
So Dr. Gobler, we're dealing with these rising sea levels, an increase in the intensity, the frequency of these storms. How does what we're experiencing now compare to maybe just 10 years ago, and what are we expecting for the future?
Yeah, well, this is again a climate change issue. In the Northeast U.S. in general, since the middle of the 20th century, there's been a 75% increase in the volume of rain that comes in a given storm. And that what used to be, say, the 100-year storm is now happening every 10 years or less. And so we're getting these events where it's not a half an inch of rain, it's not 1 inch of rain, but 4 inches of rain. Sometimes, we've had, a few years back, we had 16 inches of rain on Long Island just in a matter of hours. So we're getting these almost like tropical deluges that are happening. And yeah, our infrastructure is not built to deal with that. And so, and as climate change marches on, there's going to be more moisture in the air, and so these events are going to be more frequent. And I think we've all experienced it and seen it. I think over the winter we had a bunch of those events, and certainly last summer we're going to expect more of it going forward. So yeah, unfortunately, what's happening there is it's now common and will become more common.
Great.
And I want to say it doesn't stop there. So it's not only the more frequent rainfalls, but in our lack of wisdom, we've built over many tributaries and intermittent streams. So for instance, the South Shore Estuary has about 121 streams that drains into it. Only a lot of them have been filled in, paved over. But now with these torrential rainfalls, these streams are reemerging in people's basements, in the street, in condo complexes, and that has added to the flooding crisis because we didn't plan development well enough to understand if the stream is dry for 5 years, it comes back We have to have long-term. We didn't do that. It's added to today's crisis.
So this is the groundwater
Yes.
affecting, okay.
It's groundwater and the torrential rainfalls, because the rain will go into that dormant tributary and it comes alive again.
Right.
In your basement.
Right, so the storms, the groundwater,
Yes.
creating this flooding with the aging infrastructure. I mean, this is something the towns have to pay for. How are we dealing with that from a town standpoint?
Well, town's funded by Brookhaven Town taxpayers, and plows have been replaced with pumps. That's what's going on not only in Brookhaven, but across Long Island. We're dealing with it everywhere. We just spent another $6 million on the North Shore when it comes to drainage. On Blue Point Road in Selden, well, a couple of years ago, we had massive rainfall. We had water go through people's houses. We had to buy up houses on the north side of 25. We had to condemn a piece of property to build a sump. These are the realities that we face, and everything we do is funded by taxpayers. And if we don't do it now, the cost in the future for taxpayers, because everything, even as Robert mentioned, is going up in cost.
Yes.
It's going to be more costly to stick your head in the sand and try to do it in the future.
Well, we spoke to a family, Robert, in Farmingdale, who every time it rains, their whole street floods. And you'd think Farmingdale, why is Farmingdale flooding? And they are blaming it on an infrastructure issue. But what are their options? I mean, they don't have flood insurance in Farmingdale, at least some of them didn't. What can they do?
Well, most people think, well, I don't live near the water. Why would I need flood insurance? But a flood doesn't have to be living on the ocean, living on a bay. You could have excessive rain not being able to absorb by the ground. To your point, Adrian, these estuaries are not being filled properly. And now you're in an environment where the roads are filling up, basements are filling up, houses. If the houses aren't pitched properly, some of the roads are higher than some of the houses, so the water's going down. It happens all the time. The FEMA, when they set up the flood zones, not everyone's in one flood zone. Right. You're in high hazard, low hazard, medium hazard flood zones. If you're in somewhere like Farmingdale, you're in a low hazard area. Buy the insurance. It's less expensive. It's not very expensive to buy it that way. And then you have the peace of mind. People turn around and say, oh, I don't want to spend extra money I'm not spending now. But when you have that flood, it's going to affect a lot of people.
A lot of people are taking matters into their own hands. We have another reader's question here that we want to get to. Adrian, I think maybe we'll address this one to you here. This is from Lori Ann from Lindenhurst. She says, what can individual homeowners do to help fight the problem? We installed a private French drain system that has worked so far since Sandy.
Okay. I think, what really private homeowners could do is have more vegetation around the home. That really does help sink in the water and absorb it. But make sure that the storm drain by your home in the street is clear. If it's not clear, call your local government and ask them to come and clean it out before the rain comes. That's actually a big deal. A lot of municipalities, because they're so stressed financially, are not cleaning out these storm drains as they should. And that causes the street flooding, which backs up into the home, or at least goes into the basement. So those are some of the small things that they can do.
Okay, great. So we know the rising price of insurance that's affecting all of us across Long Island, but not just because of what we're dealing with here. I mean, this is happening across the nation. So let's take a look at how Long Islanders are dealing with that.
It's a great lifestyle. I mean, it's a lifestyle that's not duplicated in a lot of parts of the world.
West Islip's John Spezio has always lived near the water, and once he sells this house, plans to move somewhere else near the water. He says he's been lucky, though. No flooding or storm damage. He does carry flood insurance as a precaution, even though he's not required to.
To live on the water and not have flood insurance, we see what happened in Florida. Those houses were wiped out, and the people had no money to repair those homes, and so they had to just sell the property.
State environmental experts warn that sea levels are expected to rise 13 to 25 inches by the 2050s. Add to that more intense storms and increased erosion, and you have more Long Island communities at risk. This map shows the areas where flood insurance costs are expected to be the highest. The information came from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The darker shades of red show communities paying the most. Areas like Babylon, Brightwaters, Blue Point, Copeg, Islip, and West Islip. Experts say the increase in premiums came after FEMA finalized a new way to calculate risk. According to a Newsday analysis, the average cost of flood insurance for single-family homes on Long Island will nearly double to about $2,500 a year. Experts say several factors play into this.
We've had repetitive lost property. That's a significant surcharge rather than just one loss, right? So we've had several over a certain dollar amount. The distance to water, your flood zone, right? Any risk mitigation that you've had.
So we are all seeing our prices go up, Robert. It sounds like essentially we're paying for other people's problems and vice versa with this.
Yeah, but I think one thing that's important is you're seeing a lot more opportunities to buy flood insurance. It used to be FEMA. Now you have a lot of private insurers using technology to provide options. That keeps the cost down. So when they're talking about something like $2,500, on an average, they're also based on the value of the home. So if you use an example with your home being a 2-bedroom home versus someone with a large one, that's going to skew those numbers. But having more insurers willing to put up capacity for flood insurance will hopefully help to keep the cost down somewhat. But again, to your point also, when you're maintaining a home, the insurance companies want you to participate in the risk. Have a little skin in the game. They want you to maintain your house. They want to make sure that your basements are secure. I mean, a storm drain is great, but if you have a hydrostatic water coming up through the ground, that's not going to do much for you.
Let's take another viewer or reader's question. This one will be for you, Robert. Mark of Aquabog says, we just found out Liberty Mutual is not underwriting homes on Long Island. Is this an indication that we're on the path that Florida has been following, where the taxpayers are going to be left holding the bag and the county or state will have to go into the insurance business?
I don't think we're there yet, and I'm not sure if we will be there, but I do see, as I mentioned earlier, insurance companies are scaling back. But remember, they're looking at their overall portfolio. If I'm an insurance company, I have a lot of homes in a certain town or geographic area. I have to watch that carefully for when that big storm comes. So I think what's happening now is the carriers are stepping back a little bit. But there's a lot of carriers still providing insurance. So I think what you're going to see is a wait and see for the next couple of years. I do think that people have to understand that it's not the old days where I'll just go to somebody else. They're looking at your home, your experience. Have you had claims before? Has your neighborhood had claims before? Have your neighbors had them? And they'll look at their overall aggregation of business, and that will dictate how much capacity they'll put out in the geographic area.
Well, Supervisor Panico, what have you been hearing from residents concerned about the increased price of insurance?
Well, I think a lot of people are waiting, and the Army Corps is slow. Appreciate the Army Corps. Just everything in the federal government's very slow because they're looking at the opportunity and the FIMP program to raise 4,400 homes from Babylon going all the way out through East Hampton is going to be the determining factor as to whether or not people can actually stay in their homes any longer with rising flood insurance premiums going up. We're working with the Army Corps. There are going to be 2 pilot programs, one in Lindenhurst in the town of Babylon, one in Mastic Beach. But even a wrinkle on that, looking forward into the future, will these new raised homes, will a municipality be able to maintain roads that are constantly underwater? That's something that individual homeowners should look at when choosing whether or not they're going to make this their lifetime home. And number 2, the other big point is, take an area like Mastic Beach, where the people really need it the most. It's not a wealthy area by any stretch of the imagination. Good people. I grew up in Mastic Beach, who work very hard. Whether or not the federal government's going to have relocation, an allocation for that, because think about this. Think about if you're living in Mastic Beach, your flood insurance premiums are going to potentially price you out of your home. You're going to be forced to sell. You want to stay there. There's no glut of affordable rentals for you to pick up and move your family into for probably 6 to 8 months to get your house up in the air, CO'd and closed out. Where are all these people going to go? They're still on the hook for paying the mortgage on the property, and people don't, the people who most need this government program may not be able to avail themselves of the program if the federal government doesn't step in and help the people who need the help the most.
Right. A big concern for sure. We want to open it up for any audience members who have a question that they'd like to ask anyone in the panel. We have 2 microphones up front. We can kind of go back and forth if anyone has a question for any of these 4
why are we not incorporating the cost of climate change that the supervisor has talked about, his budget covering all these climate problems? Why when we're talking about renewable energy solutions, are we not incorporating the cost of climate change?
I think I can answer that. As your supervisor, I'm glad you're here from East Patchogue. We are. You should be proud to know that you live in a town that embraces offshore wind when some other towns, I'm not going to name them, out east, talk about green energy, offshore wind, and when that cable was to come ashore, it was met with protests and litigation. It was your town government that received that cable. That cable's being built in the same place that the transatlantic cables come over from England, through Smith Point, up William Floyd Parkway, will make its way over to Holtzville, where it's going to go into the substation. And you should also, and I think you will be proud, that Brookhaven Town is, I think, the only town in Suffolk County without a moratorium on battery energy storage systems.
And
Thank you.
I'll add to it.
Sure.
What we're talking about here is climate change. And the solution to climate change is transitioning from dirty, dangerous fossil fuels to renewable energy, offshore wind, and solar, and battery storage. So, there's the big answer, which is break our addiction to fossil fuels. And then there's the other answers, which how do we prepare the coastlines and the way we develop to also prepare for climate change. But the real answer is here, and actually Dr. Goebel and I were talking about this while we were waiting to come on stage, is that we need to transition as quickly as possible. And the quicker we transition, the less damage will be done. And that's the way to address the damage, is by really applying the solution, which is renewable energy.
And just to affirm that, actually, I
Sure,
just want to just say
absolutely.
that, how much sea level we have this century is going to be fully a function of how warm the planet gets. And so the choices we make, obviously it's local here, but the quicker there is a transition to alternative energy, the less the planet warms and the less sea level we're going to have. So there is a range. The final sea level rise amount is going to be set by actions we take in the coming years.
Great. Thank you for your question.
As a Long Islander who cares about the climate, I think we need to find answers, and I'd like to ask all of you, what more do you think we can do to reach everyday people on Long Island and make them understand better that this is an issue that they need to react to in a positive way?
Adrian, you want to take that
I'll
one?
start, sure. Thank you for the question. I'm going to pay Supervisor Panico a big compliment. I think we need more leaders like Supervisor Panico, who's not afraid to stand up and say, I support offshore wind, I support a cable connection, I support the other technology needed like battery backup storage. We have to transition. We must transition as a society. And I've spoken to many elected officials on all levels of government. Some are very strong. I would consider the supervisor one of the strongest. And some are not. They're still, a little bit tentative. And I'm thinking what you should be nervous about is climate change, not the solution to climate change. So I think that's one thing to answer your question, is that we need the leadership. The public supports climate change solutions. I've looked at every poll done in the last decade. I can tell you the public believes in climate change, supports offshore wind, supports solar, and now we need the leadership to take it to the next level.
Do you have a response, Supervisor, to that?
I do. I think ultimately it's education, and I think it's from panel discussions like this. I think one of the biggest problems we face is that any issue nowadays, no matter what it is, including climate change, becomes very politicized. And I think that's a very difficult barrier to overcome. And then when you inject social media and the amount of misinformation that is out there on this topic and almost every other topic, that not only that we're bombarded with, but even kids and younger generations who use social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, to rely as a means to get factual information or what they think is factual information, makes it increasingly more difficult All you can do is try to present an argument and have evidence and backup for your argument to get reasonable people to agree with you. There are some people who will still argue that the earth is flat. You're never going to win those people over, but you got to move away from those people and try to get to the reasonable center. And I'll tell you that in 15 years, 80% of the people who live, more than 80%, you can reach a place of reasonableness with, and you can have a factual discussion with them.
And look, let's be honest, climate change is the greatest challenge of our generation, and we need to meet that challenge together, collaboratively, collectively, but also we need to do it forcefully, because there's not, we can't do it later. We have to do it now. And I think we've had a lot of progress in the last couple of years, but we need more.
Well, we're all here today doing that.
Yes,
So.
which is, thank you for that.
Happy to be here. Let's take another question.
Okay. Rich Grow, I'm from the town of Babylon, and I'm actually a town of Brookhaven resident. The talk has been focused on flooding and the increased rainfall events, that sort of thing. Hasn't been any discussion on wind, the potential for catastrophic wind damage. I would be interested in the insurance perspective and also the scientific perspective. We haven't had an event like that since probably 1938, where we had gusts, over 120. So that's my sort of question. Maybe you could give us some perspective on that.
We haven't talked hurricanes, so I just do want to just mention that, again, it's another climate change issue. Hurricanes are fueled by warm oceans. The ocean today, June 4th, 2024, is warmer than it's ever been on that date. And I could have said that statement and be correct for the past year. Wow. The oceans have never been this warm. And hurricanes are fueled by warm oceans. And so these storms, these hurricanes, are going to be stronger than ever. And yeah, so they're going to lead to, certainly, we've talked about storm surge, but then heavy winds as well. And we haven't had very intense winds-based storm, but we're due, and it's not a matter of if, but when.
So Robert, does wind play a factor in any of these insurance companies?
Yeah, very much so. We were talking earlier that this year is expected to have a lot of storms. And the fear the carriers have is that when you have these big wind events, they follow with flooding. Mm. So now you're worried about the damage that the wind could happen from wind. And the wind could be inland, you don't need to be near the water. But then subsequently what always happens is then you have the flooding. So you're trying to budget for both and very carefully, and that's becoming a problem.
We've got two more questions. Let's get through them. Hi, Ann. How are you?
Hi. Good evening. Thank you for doing this whole meeting. Actually, I love the title, Paying the Price, because when I think about my personal situation, the whole cliff collapsed in front of me. I'm looking at a price tag of over $1 million. While actually I bought my house for $400,000 10 years ago, and I pay over $200,000 tax in 10 years. I never imagined that it would be my responsibility to pay the price of over $1 million for the cliff right in front of my house. So my question is, what advice, that you could give me as a homeowner, as a taxpayer, now that I'm facing a really big problem that, I don't think I own the cliff. So my question is, what are the town and the government agencies going to do to protect and compensate the residents from losing their home, deep decline in home market values, significant increase in property insurance, or even losing the property insurance entirely because of the environmental impact on the North Shore cliffs?
Supervisor, would you like to respond to you?
Well, that was a lot of questions.
Yes.
I will tell you this. We will do all that which we can do legally to help situations like yours, recognizing that it is a private road, private association, and we have limitations as to how we can expend tax dollars to try to help you. It's a difficult situation. yours in speaking to your councilwoman. I believe there has been perhaps some redirection of runoff, perhaps by others, that may have caused some of the advanced erosion of the bluff, which caused the collapse of the road. I really can't say much more than that, because if there isn't litigation, I'm sure there will be litigation, either amongst people in your community or potentially even against the town or other municipalities. But as your supervisor, I will do all which I am allowed to do legally to try to assist you and also be an advocate for you and your neighbors.
Thank you, Yan. Thank you for being here. Hi.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Nicholas. I'm from Rocky Point, coincidentally one of Yan's neighbors.
Everyone's here from Brookhaven.
Yeah.
No kidding. Yeah.
So, by trade and only in context, I'm a full-time professional real estate agent. I've worked across Suffolk County and Nassau as well, and I've been in and out of a lot of homes. And more importantly, I am regularly and routinely with first-time home buyers, people that aren't familiar with the processes and challenges of home ownership, looking at rotting window wells and basements. I see the word efflorescence and their heads turn sideways. There's important things to talk about. Hydrostatic pressure sounds like a magical word, but these are real concerns for where we live. Any commentary from anybody on the panel about what either the township may plan to do, the insurance industry on a whole, about to educate home buyers or homeowners, because I think that's one of the most effective and direct ways to start to make a change while these larger issues and ideas continue to get researched and pursued.
Well, if I may,
Sure.
I would avail myself of all of the municipal information, county GIS maps. But you know, it was interesting. This year, New York State eliminated the $500 property disclosure. I'm an attorney. I've represented people. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yes.
And I think you're going to see a significant uptick in litigation coming from the elimination of that property disclosure allotment of $500, because invariably you're going to end up, hopefully not you, but other people similarly situated are going to represent people. They're going to have the disclosure. There's going to be no flooding, and then that winter storm is going to happen, and you're going to have water in people's homes. I would, say, and as Robert said when we were back in the green room, and he could say it himself, that call a person like Robert first before you think about buying a home. And I'll turn it over to Robert because he can say it better, because it's what he said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, I agree. There's so much information available to home buyers, to realtors, to the general public. Research. You're spending a lot of money to buy an asset. And as I mentioned before, the cost of labor, the cost of materials is going up every year. It's compounding. That causes insurance premiums to go up.
Right.
But if you're going to go out and buy a house, you're going to talk to your lawyer, your financial advisor, talk to your insurance advisor, ask them, what would it cost me? You give them the address. They can give you a good idea what that cost is going to be, and you should be factoring that into your overall budget to see if you can afford it.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you so
all.
much. Thank you. All right, so we want to get our final thoughts from our panel. Of course, this will be an ongoing discussion, something we all will be dealing with for years to come. So you're all experts in your field here. What is the harsh reality? I mean, what needs to happen from here on out to make a change? Dr. Gobler, I think I'll just kick things off with you for your
How
final.
do we fix the problem?
For just your final thoughts on what we're dealing with.
This is all being driven by climate change, right? We have rising sea levels because the oceans are warmer and they're expanding. We've got polar ice caps melting. And storms are more intense because of climate change. There's more intense rainfall because of climate change. So, I mean, attacking climate change is therefore priority number one. And, we've talked about education as well. And I think it's not always intuitive. When people think about the changing climate, they think, oh, maybe it's going to get warmer. This isn't necessarily the first thing that comes to mind. So I do think it's important, and, kudos to Newsday for bringing this to light, this issue, but, to make those connections that, oh, well, yeah, we're getting more rainfall because there's more evaporation, and our rainfall events are more intense, and, we're getting, the beaches disappear this winter because, well, the sea level's a foot higher. And I think making these connections will then motivate people to move faster towards addressing climate change.
Adrian, final thoughts from you?
Yes. Climate change is here. It's dangerous, it's damaging, and it's scary. There was a UN report released where the scientists said that climate change has put us on the highway to hell, and our foot is on the accelerator. We need to stop. We need to change. We need to break our addiction to fossil fuels, transition to renewables, and we need to understand that climate change is not a political issue. It is a human issue. It is an issue where we all can participate, we all can make a difference, and we can solve the challenge. We can solve the problem, but we all have to try and we all have to participate. I think we're going to get there, but again, we need good leadership and we need the public's engagement and understanding and support.
Supervisor Kendall.
Well, I think it comes down to a lot of research, a lot of individual responsibility as well. You know, we're all responsible for our own actions. We all have a social responsibility to each other. That's what part of living in a community is about. And I think we really have to open our eyes to true science. I think we should trust people who are in that arena. You know, we're blessed to have Stony Brook University in Brookhaven. I'm a graduate of Stony Brook University. Dr. Gobler's laboratory is there. I would say reach out to your local elected officials. Make the preservation of property a priority. And I think it's something people universally agree on, and look to people who are actual experts on these issues for advice, for education. And I would say, you know, Dr. Gobler does a phenomenal job. He practices what he preaches. Flooding is such the topic that the men didn't even wear socks today. So that shows you right there he's committed to the cause.
Oh, Robert, too, we're so lucky to have you here to answer our questions, too, about insurance. So any final thoughts from you tonight?
Well, I appreciate being here. I mean, climate change is real. We all understand that. And I think sharing information in venues like this is very, very important. But I want to also be clear that climate change and the impact is a part of the insurance issue. Insurance costs will continue to rise, not just because of climate change, because of other factors as well. We're in a litigious environment. The cost of labor and materials, the cost of rebuilding has gotten expensive. So people should be looking at all these things, but climate change obviously is very important.
Well, thank you all for being here as part of our panel. We truly appreciate it. Thank you to everyone in the audience for being here and participating. We want this discussion to continue, so please go to newsday.com/nextLI. You can tell us your stories there. That will inform our coverage and help us all find a solution together. So thank you all for being here for this Newsday Next LI discussion.